President Cyril Ramaphosa announced his intention to establish a commission of inquiry into the delays in investigating and prosecuting cases referred to by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. This follows a lawsuit filed by 20 individuals who were victims of murder, torture and abduction at the hands of apartheid-era security forces. The president stressed the importance of establishing the full truth and ensuring long overdue justice and closure. Well, joining us now for further insights and a discussion on this is Yasmin Sooka, who is a human rights lawyer and a former commissioner on the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. A very good afternoon to you, Yasmin. Thank you very much for your time. Finally, the families get their wish.
Good afternoon, Buya, and good afternoon to your viewers. Yeah, it has taken a long time. And, you know, I would say 6 years of writing to the president by former truth commissioners and, of course, the families of victims before there were, and, of course, a court application, which is one that we brought against the president, the Minister of Justice, you know, to really get this litigation on the go. And in response to that, of course, the president withdrew. Initially, they sought to oppose, and then they withdrew their opposition to the application. And, you know, the president announced, I think, fairly unilaterally on Monday that he intended to set up this commission. The challenge, of course, is that it's not all good news because, you know, we asked the court to actually do two things besides you know, getting the president to agree to set up commission. The one is really to provide the victims of apartheid-era crimes with a declaration that their rights were violated, and that, in fact, their rights were violated because of the unlawful conduct which resulted in obstruction by the state and its institutions. And then, of course, the second, you know, a claim that we made was that we were looking for constitutional damages to really vindicate the families on the violations that have affected them. And the third form of relief that we asked for was the setting up of a commission of inquiry. Now, we understood initially that, in fact, there would be mediation around the way in which the first two claims would be dealt with, the declaration and the question of constitutional damages. And instead, I think what the president decided to do was to set up this commission and, in fact, to roll up all of the claims into this one commission, which is really problematic because a commission of inquiry is both a fact-finding and an investigation structure. It doesn't have the right to decide on what appropriate legal remedies are. And so, you know, in dealing with the question of the declaration and the damages claim, that is not something that the commission can actually do. And in fact, after its fact-finding mandate, it will simply be empowered to make recommendations to the president, who will then, of course, have to consult Parliament on how to take the recommendations forward. I think what we understood from the outset was that the Commission of Inquiry would in fact look at what was it that happened during that period between 2003 and 2017 in terms of why the state and many senior officials were really allegedly implicated in not wanting to pursue these cases. I think we also anticipated that the commission would also look into this question of where did the instructions actually come from to begin to pursue this kind of obstruction. And then, of course, the fact that the perpetrators to date even claim that, in fact, there had been another deal on the table. This is what we expected the Commission of Inquiry to deal with. And so I think that while the news is to be welcomed, we are still very concerned about the fact that the first two forms of relief that we seek on behalf of the victims, that is still going to be the subject of further litigation.
I mean, for someone who, as you say, needed a court application in order for him to, take this decision, and initially sought to oppose, what do you think persuaded him this time around?
I think it's a question of getting advice to kick the can down the road. Of course, these two issues, the litigation, the court action, and the setting up of a commission of inquiry can move in parallel. But knowing how long things take in our country, it's quite possible that he will roll up all of this in the mandate of the commission. And then, of course, on behalf of victims, we will be opposing that. And as the way in which court things go in our country, it's quite likely that this will only be dealt with perhaps next year or the year after that. And once again, I think you're going to have this acute frustration. And so it does beg the question, why don't you, initially, I think we all thought that this was such a great thing that was going to happen. We were going to be able to move with this. You would deal with these two issues by mediation. And then, of course, you would get to the real meat of the matter, which is who is responsible for the political interference. But now that not having happened, I mean, while many people say, oh, this is a great stride in the matter, that's true. It's great to have a commission on the go, but as you know, it takes a long time to work out the mandate. It takes more time to appoint the right person. And then, of course, to decide on what the rules are going to be like. And by the time it actually gets off the ground and they find money for it, we're probably down to the end of the year. And this is going to be a real attempt to move with speed. So from that perspective, it's very disappointing for the families of victims.
Oh, it doesn't only take time. I mean, if you cast your mind back to your state capture inquiries, your Farlam commissions, the commission into SARS, your Arms Deal Commission, and look at the recommendations made at all those, after all those inquiries, we don't have a particularly proud record of following up on their outcomes.
Yeah, well, that it's a question that we were asked at the beginning when we sat on with victims to actually ask them, what should we be doing? And there was a real concern that commissions of inquiry in our country don't have a good history because, firstly, it takes an enormous amount of time and money to set them up. But secondly, of course, nobody has the political will to implement the recommendations. And when you look at the sorry saga of what's happened to the recommendations of the Zondo Commission, the fact that we've hardly been able to get successful cases on the go, this was not really a good example. But nevertheless, I think we put our faith in the fact that we thought we made quite a compelling case for why it was important for the history of our country, for the fact that, in fact, 31 years of celebrating democracy, we owe that to the people who lost their lives in the political struggle against apartheid and colonialism. And so one would think that this president would have acted, I think, with a great deal more thought. But, at the end of the year, one also has to remember that we wrote to him for many, many years. And it was actually only because we litigated, and we actually filed papers that you then saw action. And maybe that's a big lesson for those of us in South Africa who want the state to act with political will. The only time the state does act is when you litigate against them or when you threaten to do so. And that's not a healthy way of dealing with these kinds of issues in our country. So disappointing. And obviously, I think there's going to be a lot more work to do to make sure that we can get to a point where we can get them to sit down and say, let's deal with the first two matters. And then we can talk about your getting on with the commission, which would be a very good way to go for the victims.
same parallels people have drawn when it comes to service delivery, that the only time the state gets to sit up and listen is when people take to the streets, start destroying property, and so on. Yasmin Sooka, let me thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate it. She's a leading human rights lawyer and, of course, a former commissioner of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, but also someone who's been traveling this road with the families that have been responsible for the litigation that she was talking about, but also for imploring the president to do at least part, I mean, what he did in part, which, as Yasmin was saying, the president initially sought to oppose. Even. We'll see what comes out of this, where the terms of reference are being formulated. We were told yesterday by the presidential spokesperson. We were also told that they were close to identifying people who will, of course, run with this project.